On the morning of November 23, 1977, Daniel Chabalala arrived for work at 17 Wedza Road in Selcourt, Springs. He knocked on the door of his employers, Robert and Jeanne Smit. No answer. The door was unlocked. He let himself in. In the passageway, he found Robert Smith's body, 3 gunshot wounds, a knife in his back.
On the kitchen walls, across the fridge and freezer, someone had spray-painted 2 words in red: Raoul Tem. 48 years later, no one has been arrested for the murders of Robert and Jeanne Smit. The police docket remains hidden from the public view. The briefcase Robert carried from his office that night was never found. And those 2 words, painted in blood red across the kitchen, have haunted South Africa ever since.
Robert van Schalkwyk Smith was born on July 13, 1933, in Boshoff in the Orange Free State. He was a child of privilege in apartheid South Africa, born into the Afrikaner establishment that would govern the country for half a century. Smith excelled academically. He graduated first class from Grey College in Bloemfontein, earned a Bachelor of Commerce degree cum laude from the University of the Orange Free State, and won a Rhodes Scholarship to Pembroke College, Oxford. At Oxford, he met and married Jeanne. She did not like being called Cora. She preferred Jeanne. By all accounts, she was devoted to her husband and their 2 children, Robert Jr. and Liza. She encouraged him when his ambitions wavered. She was his anchor. Smith completed a doctorate in economics from Stellenbosch University through part-time study. In 1967, at the age of 34, he was appointed Deputy Secretary of Finance. It was a meteoric rise. From 1971 to 1975, he served as South Africa's ambassador to the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C. He moved in the highest circles of international finance during a period when South Africa was facing increasing economic isolation. When he returned to South Africa in 1975, he took a position with Santam International, a company involved in what would later be described as sanctions-busting activities. His role was to help South Africa acquire strategic products despite growing international embargoes. By 1977, South Africa was in crisis. The death of Steve Biko in police custody on September 12 had brought international condemnation. The UN Security Council imposed a mandatory arms embargo in October. The government of Prime Minister John Vorster seemed adrift, unable to respond to mounting pressure. Elections were scheduled for November 30, 1977. Robert Smith was selected as the National Party candidate for the Springs constituency in the East Rand. The expectation was clear. Once elected, Smith would assume a high-level position in government. Many believed he would become Minister of Finance. He and Jeanne rented the house in Springs while their children remained at the family home in Pretoria. Smith had connections, he had access, and according to several people who spoke with him in the weeks before his death, he possessed information he described as explosive. He told colleagues he planned to share this information after the election. What that information was exactly has never been confirmed, but the timing of what happened next suggests someone believed he knew too much.
November 22, 1977, was a Tuesday. Robert Smith spent the day at his election office in Springs. He had lunch with friends. In the afternoon, he spoke with journalist Rita Niemand. At 3:15 p.m., his receptionist Sarah Lombard took a phone call. A man's voice. He said his name was MacDougall. He wanted to speak with Dr. Smith about politics.
He asked if it would be possible to see Dr. Smith that evening. He mentioned that he lived near Dr. Smith. Lombard transferred the call. In Smith's diary, he recorded the appointment, MacDougall, 8 p.m. The spelling was slightly different. Whether this mattered, no one knows. At 6:10 p.m., Daniel Chishabala, the Smith's driver, brought Jeanne Cora home. She sat down to watch television while he made himself a meal in the kitchen. He left at approximately 6:70 p.m. Jeanne Cora saw him to the door. She was alive. She was alone. At 7:14 p.m., some accounts say 7:40 p.m., Jeanne Cora telephoned Sarah Lombard at the election office. She asked if Dr. Smith was still there. He was. She told Lombard to tell her husband that his guests are waiting for him. Lombard conveyed the message. Smith left the office soon after with a Springs town councillor, Danny Joubert. Joubert later testified that Smith was carrying 2 attaché cases. Joubert saw Smith's car pull away just before 8 p.m. What happened next can only be reconstructed from the evidence left behind.
It appears that as Jeanne Cora hung up the telephone, she sensed something behind her. She turned. She raised her left hand instinctively, defensively. She was shot in the back of the head at close range with a .32 caliber gun, then in the chest, then in the right thigh. The shots were not immediately fatal, or perhaps she was already dead when the stabbing began. The autopsy would reveal 14 stab wounds from a stiletto knife. 14. This was not simply murder. It was brutality beyond what was necessary to kill. Forensic experts would describe it as overkill, suggesting rage or a personal dimension to the violence. Jeanne Cora's body was found slumped over the telephone in the lounge. Robert Smit arrived home sometime after 8 p.m. He walked through the front door. A shot from a .38 caliber gun struck him in the neck, grazing him. The bullet lodged in the wall. He collapsed. From close range, the killer fired again, once in the head, once in the back, once in the chest. Then, like his wife, Robert was stabbed, once in the back, with the same stiletto knife. 2 different caliber weapons, systematic execution, and then the knife. The murders were discovered the next morning when Daniel Chishabala returned to the house. When Lieutenant Gerhard Viljoen of the East Rand Murder and Robbery Squad arrived at the scene, he found Robert's body in the passageway, Jeanne Cora's in the lounge. The letters RATEM had been spray-painted in red across the fridge and kitchen walls. Only Robert's briefcase was missing, the brown leather case he had been carrying when he left the office. Neighbors heard nothing, saw nothing. Some reports claimed that the killers or accomplices had returned to the scene at least 2 hours after the shootings. It was then, these accounts suggest, that the spray painting and the stabbings occurred. If true, it would suggest that someone wanted to make a clinical assassination look like the work of a deranged killer. But these are theories. What is certain is this: 2 people were dead, their murders meticulously planned, and the scene deliberately staged.
Lieutenant Gerrit Viljoen, the original investigating officer, told a reporter shortly after the murders that he believed he would never be able to solve the case. It was a remarkably candid admission. From the beginning, rumors circulated that someone high in the Afrikaner establishment had ordered the assassination. Particular suspicion fell on Hendrik van den Berg, the head of the Bureau for State Security, known as Boss. Van den Berg was a man who once claimed to know everything that was going on in South Africa. He had also told a government commission, "I have enough men to commit murder if I tell them to kill."
I don't care who the prey is. The theory that emerged almost immediately was that Smit had stumbled upon a high-level scandal involving foreign currency and was planning to blow the whistle after his election to Parliament. In December 1977, the Sunday Express reported that police were considering the possibility that Smit had been murdered after uncovering a foreign currency racket. Then, in 1978, the information scandal broke. Also known as Muldergate, the scandal revealed that Prime Minister John Foster, along with Information Minister Connie Mulder and Secretary of Information Eshel Rudy, had authorized the use of a secret slush fund worth at least $72 million.
The money, channeled from the defense budget, was used to fund propaganda projects. The most ambitious one was the establishment of The Citizen, a pro-government newspaper, and attempts to purchase the Rand Daily Mail and the Washington Star. The operation, called Project Annemarie, after Rudy's teenage daughter, was designed to counter negative perceptions of South Africa abroad. When Justice Anton Mostert released his findings on November 2, 1978, the Rand Daily Mail ran a famous headline, "It's all true." The scandal destroyed careers. Vorster resigned as Prime Minister in September 1978, citing ill health, and took up the largely ceremonial position of State President. He resigned from that post in disgrace in June 1979 after a commission concluded he knew everything about the corruption. Connie Mulder, once tipped to succeed Vorster, lost his cabinet post, his leadership position in the National Party, and eventually his seat in Parliament. Eshel Rudy fled the country, moving between Ecuador, the United Kingdom, the United States, and France before being extradited to face fraud and theft charges. Rumors immediately linked Smith's murder to the information scandal. Had he discovered the secret slush fund? Was he planning to expose it? The Truth and Reconciliation Commission would later hear evidence suggesting that Smit possessed information about secret overseas bank accounts used to pay front organizations. But the investigation into the murders themselves went nowhere. In 1997, Roy Allen, a former member of BOSS, was named by the Afrikaans newspaper Beeld as the police's chief suspect. Allen vehemently denied the allegations. He said he had never belonged to the so-called Z Squad, a BOSS unit alleged to have carried out extrajudicial killings.
In 2006, based on information from an anonymous source in the intelligence services, Beeld reported that Allen and two alleged former Z Squad members, Dries Verwey and Phil Freeman, had carried out the murders. By then, Verwey had died in 1980. Freeman had committed suicide in 1990. Allen was living in Australia. No charges were ever laid. In a 2013 article for Politics Web, Allen wrote about his suspicions. He believed Verwey and Freeman were involved, but he insisted he had no direct evidence. He recounted that shortly after the murders, Verwey's driver had asked him if he had been involved with Verwey in the killings. It was a strange question, Allen noted. The driver knew Allen had conducted extrajudicial operations with Verwey in Cape Town. Allen also addressed the theory that a Cuban hit squad had been responsible. In February 1980, American investigative journalist Joe Trento published an article in Delaware's Wilmington Sunday News Journal. The article detailed the CIA's use of a hit squad made up of Cuban exiles who carried out assassinations for Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet. The squad, Trento reported, had killed a South African economist and his wife in their South African home in November 1977. In 2011, the Cape Times tracked down Virgilio Paz Romero, a member of the Cuban nationalist movement in Miami. He categorically denied involvement in the Smit murders. Others noted that the crime scene did not bear the hallmarks of a boss hit. Boss operatives were professionals. They did not typically kill wives, they did not engage in overkill, and they certainly did not spray paint cryptic messages on walls. Yet the murders were undeniably professional in execution. The killers knew when Robert would be home. They had arranged the meeting. They used 2 different weapons, likely to obscure ballistics. They left almost no physical evidence.
Some observers, including journalist James Maibeg, speculated that the person who carried out the hit was not necessarily the same person who did the writing and stabbing. The spray paint and the excessive violence, Maibeg suggested, may have been added afterward to make a cold-blooded political assassination look like the work of a lunatic. There is some support for this theory. The can of red spray paint used to write RAU team was the Smiths. It was already in the kitchen. It was not brought to the scene by the killers. This suggests improvisation or misdirection. Then there is the question of those 2 words, RAUTEM. Over the years, countless theories have been offered. Some believed the letters were an acronym for a boss unit. Others speculated they were the initials of the killers. In 2009, former security policeman Alan D. Elston claimed in his book The Tall Assassin that the letters stood for Rand Afrikaans University Technis and Moord, Rand Afrikaans University Technical and Murder. He suggested it referred to a secret facility on the Vaal Dam used by Boss. But no theory has ever been confirmed. What is clear is that the investigation was plagued by obstruction, conflicting information, and what appeared to be deliberate efforts to keep the truth hidden. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission heard evidence on the Smith murders after the end of apartheid. Its report concluded that Robert and Jeanne Smit were killed by members of the security forces and that their deaths constituted a gross violation of human rights. The TRC's report also stated that the evidence suggested some party retained a contemporary interest in ensuring that the facts surrounding the killings remain hidden, indicating a political agenda, or at least one in which powerful, possibly financial interests were vested. No applications for amnesty were received in respect of the murders.
Nearly 45 years have passed since the murders of Robert and Jeanne Smit. No one has ever been arrested, no one has been charged, no one has been convicted. The police docket remains sealed. Robert's briefcase, the one he was carrying when he left his office that night, has never been found. What it contained remains unknown. The question of who ordered the killings, if indeed anyone did, has never been answered. The question of why Jeanne had to die remains a source of deep unease. If Robert was killed for what he knew, why was his wife murdered with such brutality? Some have speculated that she was killed simply because she was there. She had seen the killers, she could identify them. But the overkill, the 14 stab wounds, suggests something more. Rage, hatred, or perhaps a message. The identity of the man who called himself MacDougall or MacDonald has never been established. Was he one of the killers, an accomplice, or simply someone who had arranged a meeting for entirely innocent reasons? The meaning of RAUTM remains contested. Is it a clue, a red herring, a deliberate act of misdirection? Former Foreign Minister Pick Butta said in 2011, no sufficient evidence was ever found to trace the murderers. It remains one of the most haunting criminal mysteries in our country. The case was reopened in 1996 when a well-placed informer provided new information to the police. Investigators described it as progress, not a breakthrough.
The new information did not contradict the widely held belief that the Smiths were assassinated by South Africans, not by Cuban agents or a German hit squad. nor did it challenge the suspicion that the double murder was carried out on official orders because of financial impropriety at a high government level, but it led nowhere. The names of Roy Allen, Dries Verwey, and Phil Freeman have circulated as suspects. All three have been publicly named in media reports. 2 are dead. The third denies involvement. Without confessions, without forensic evidence, without witnesses willing to speak, the case remains unsolvable in any legal sense. In 2018, Liza Smit, who was 13 years old when her parents were killed, published a memoir titled I Am Liza Smit. In the book, she recounts the aftermath of the murders. 2 days after the killings, she and her brother were brought to the Springs home, presumably by the police, and shown the scene of the crime. The bodies had been removed, but the blood remained, dried, clotted, spattered across the floors and walls. A policeman explained to her, a 13-year-old child, "Here is where your father was shot, here is where he fell, and here are the marks where he was dragged down the passage." Liza spent decades searching for answers. She gathered evidence to present to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. She met with ministers, former security officials, and individuals who claimed to know what happened. She spoke with Roy Allen. She reviewed theories. She examined the cryptic methods on the wall. In the end, she found no definitive answers. Roy Allen, in his 2013 statement, concluded, "I am sadly of the opinion that the Smit murders will never be solved. This is a pity to their children, who would like some closure on the matter, and my heart goes out to them."
The murders of Robert and Jeanne Smit stand apart from most apartheid-era political killings. They were not enemies of the state. They were not activists or revolutionaries. They were members of the National Party establishment. And yet, they were killed with the level of violence and premeditation that suggested they posed a threat to someone within that same establishment. The Smith murders revealed a fracture within Afrikaner nationalism. Up until that point, as journalist James Myburgh noted, Afrikaner nationalism had been a united family. But now, members of that family were prepared to brutally murder one of their own. The case has had a lasting impact on how South Africans view the apartheid era. It is a reminder that the machinery of state violence did not only target those who opposed the regime, it also consumed those within it. For Liza Smit and her brother Robert Jr., the murders destroyed their childhood. They lost both parents in a single night. They were orphaned by a political system that offered them no justice and no closure. Liza's memoir is not just an attempt to solve her parents' murders, it is an attempt to make sense of a life shaped by unanswered questions. The case also stands as a testament to the culture of impunity that characterized apartheid South Africa. Even after the transition to democracy, even after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, even after decades of investigation, the truth remains hidden. The police docket remains sealed. The people who know what happened remain silent. Whether out of fear, loyalty, or complicity, they have chosen silence over truth. For the broader public, the Smit murders have become a symbol of something larger. They represent the secrets that apartheid kept, the lies it told, and the violence it inflicted even upon its own. The words Rao Tem, painted in red across the kitchen walls, have taken on a meaning far beyond their literal interpretation. They have become a symbol of all that remains unanswered, all that remains hidden, all that the apartheid state took to the grave. Robert Smit believed he possessed explosive information. He told people he planned to share it. Whether that information was about secret bank accounts, sanctions busting, nuclear programs, or something else entirely, we may never know. but someone believed he knew too much. And on the night of November 22nd, 1977, that belief was enough. 2 people were executed in their home, a crime scene was staged, and a mystery was created that has endured for nearly half a century. The brown briefcase that Robert Smit carried from his office that night has never been found. Whatever secrets it held disappeared with the killers into the night.